Greetings and hello to everybody in the vinyl community and the Beatles community. My name is Matt and this is my first video. So welcome to everybody. You're starting on the ground floor with me. This will be my first of hopefully many videos, mainly having to do with my love for the Beatles and collecting them over the last 53 years or so, but also looking into other bands, other artists that I also enjoy. I want to thank a few people who kind of gave me the impetus to do this and kind of set the foundation, so to speak, or gave me the influence to do this. I call them kind of the big three because those are the three individuals who influenced me and kind of sparked my interest in collecting again in vinyl, getting involved in this type of format. So first off would be Ed from the King's Court. He's been a great influence as far as his knowledge of Elvis, who I'm also a fan of Elvis, probably in my top 5 artists, and Cheap Trick, which is another one of my top 5 artists, and Ed also does many other types of presentations. So Ed from the King's Court, thank you for the influence. Also, thank you to Tim Allen, who has been another good influence as far as not only Beatles and other artists, but Ed also is into, Tim is also into things such as power pop and kind of obscure garage rock and things of that nature. And I'm also very interested in that type of collecting and that type of vinyl. So thank you, Tim Allen. And probably the number one, though, has to be Joe from Mean Mr. Mayo. He was the first person in the vinyl community I ever discovered. Started watching his videos extensively, enjoying them. And so, and being his love for the Beatles, which is very similar to mine, I really, truly enjoyed his videos, and they kind of sparked me to say, gee, you know, he's got a great collection. Again, my collection will probably never touch what Joe has, but collecting over the years, and we're about the same age, I do have quite a unique collection and unique items anyway that I thought I'd share. So Joe has been the big influence as far as the Beatles, and kind of getting off my butt, so to speak, in doing this. So Joe, thank you very much. I really appreciate what you've done over the last few years with your videos, and it's kind of set the stage for what I'm hoping to do with my Beatles collection. Again, as I said, I've been collecting about 53 years. As you'll see from today's presentation, what I'm going to do, why I'm focusing on this particular album, because it was the first album I ever received when I was a very young boy in 1964, and it kind of, as I say, set the stage for what's become the last 53 years for me, collecting music and Beatles and whatnot. So I'll get to that in a moment. Also, I want to just thank everybody in the vinyl community. There's been so many other great people out there. I can't name them all. I don't subscribe to everybody. I'm sure I'll get there eventually. But there's been a lot of other great people whose videos have really sparked my interest in getting back into this. And so I thank you all as well. So as you know from my header, I'm focusing on my tribute to Meet the Beatles. 53 years on, you might be saying, well, why are you doing it 53 years on? Why didn't you do it 3 years ago at the 50th anniversary? And I know Joe did something of that nature on his channel with the album. And it was a great video he did, but I have to be honest with you, I'm new to this type of format. I'm new to this type of medium. You'd laugh if you knew that up until about 3 or 4 months ago, I still had a flip phone. So they'll kind of tell you where I'm at as far as technology and where I'm sitting. So this is a whole new thing for me, this phone that I'm using today. Hopefully it comes out good, because you never know with my skills when it comes to these technological things. I'm old school, so bear with me as far as the technology and what I accomplish with it. But why am I doing Meet the Beatles, and why am I doing it now? Well, as I said earlier, it was the first album I ever received back in 1964 when I was 3 years old. I was very young, and it started my love for the Beatles. My parents bought it for me when I was 3 years old. And I kind of have to give my parents some credit, why they had the foresight, or why they were that astute at the time to recognize the importance of this band, and why they bought me this album as my first album in my collection. You know, the significance of them. How did they know that there was going to be some significance to this band and to the youth of our nation and the world? And that's kind of surprising considering that my parents were basically World War II, post-World War II high schoolers. Their time growing up was in the late 40s, into the big band stuff, Dorsey Brothers, Stan Kenton, Glenn Miller, swing music, Frank Sinatra, Johnny Ray. That was their music in the late 40s. And by the time they got into the rock and roll of the 50s, they were slightly too old for that type of stuff, for Elvis and whatnot. They were well into their 20s by then, and so they kind of missed the boat on Elvis and all that. So definitely by the time the Beatles came along, they were well into their 30s, early 30s when they bought me this album. So kind of have to give them credit because they saw something here and they saw some interest in it. Maybe they jumped on the craze of the mania and getting into what was going on. But they did it, and I appreciate it. It kind of set the tone for where I'm at all these years later with collecting and whatnot. The story goes is that they bought this album for me. I was 3-4 years old, and then I used to have a spring-loaded toy cowboy horse. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember those, but the story goes that they would put this album on non-stop, and I would just jump and sway and bounce up and down on that toy horse for God knows how long, hours maybe. But my dad, his quote was that they used to have to play this thing over and over and over again. So this happens to be an original mono copy here. I bought this to replace the one I had as a child. Obviously that one would be 53 years old, so the cover and everything is all long gone, and the inner sleeve is all long gone. You know, it was on the old Capitol Rainbow Swirl label with the blue inner sleeve, and I wanted to replace the album just as I had it in 1964, bought by my parents, so that's why I bought this version. This is my original mono version. Now, my personal mono version does still exist in some form, and here it is. Like I said, the cover, long torn up, ripped and gone. Many decades ago, the inner sleeve probably was gone within months after buying it, but here's the original piece of vinyl, Meet the Beatles, that my parents bought me in 1964, and I've saved it all these years. It probably doesn't show on this video too well, but it is all beaten and scratched, and you'd never even want to play this ever again. It's just beat up, you know, but I do keep it for memory's sake, and because this is it. This is the piece of vinyl they bought me 53 years ago. So I saved it. I gotta say, Capitol did a great job with this album. I mean, it has a great playlist. The playlist fits, and superior group of songs on here. I think it's slightly superior to With the Beatles myself. Here's another version of the album I do have. It's another mono original pressing, hi-fi of the album. A second one that I also have. But you have to give them some credit. Capitol added the blue tint to the original Robert Freeman picture, which was pure black and white. I don't know if it shows too well on this video, but the bluish tint was added to the picture, to that iconic Freeman photo. And I don't know, I like this album a little better than With the Beatles. Maybe because it was the first one, maybe it was the one that set the tone for all the United States youth getting into the Beatles. But this was, you got to give Capitol credit. They get put down, and especially Dave Dexter from Capitol back in the day, who did a lot of the sequencing and playing around with the sound of the early Beatles albums. But I think they got it right on this one, folks. I really think they did a great job on this album, and putting together the song list and introducing the band to America. I think this was the way to go. It was released January 20th, I believe, 1964, and it was #1 for 11 weeks, and it stayed there until it was replaced by the Beatles' second album. Great album. I mean, I can't express enough to you young people out there, anyone under the age of 40 watching this. Great place to start with the Beatles if you want to start from the very beginning and what all us young American kids were all in a craze about and what we were excited about. This is the one. Okay, so I want to show you another one. Speaking of the craze, I got this at a yard sale flea market for free. I was buying a bunch of albums and the guy gave me this one. And you might be saying, what are you doing with that? People wrote all over it. But to me, this is a little piece of history. This is a little piece of Beatles memorabilia and history, Beatlemania, so to speak. The young person who owned this album is an original mono again from '64. And as you can see, boy, they were into the band. I mean, this is like an artifact for me. This is like an archaeologist finding, a fossil of a dinosaur. But, here's Beatlemania at its best, folks. I mean, here's, a young person. I believe her name was Michelle Meach, M-E-A-C-H, wrote her name all over the top here. So, Michelle Meach, if you're out there, I have your original mono, Meet the Beatles. Here it is. And as you can see, she was a big fan. Wrote their names all over it. And again, you'd never play this album, but I grabbed it just as an artifact, just to kind of show, what the fandom was like back then and how people got into this band on such a heavy basis. It was unbelievable. Okay. Here's another one. I'm not sure, maybe someone out there can help me with this one. This is a stereo version of the album. It's on the Rainbow Capital label. However, it does have the Gold Record Award certification right here under the Capital logo where it says High Fidelity. It is on the Rainbow Swirl label. It is a stereo copy, but I'm not sure what year this would have come out where it had that gold seal on it, gold record seal. So I'm assuming because it still has the Rainbow Swirl, it had to be sometime 65, 66. I'm not sure. But there's an very early stereo copy of the album. Here's the copy of it I bought when I was in probably like 5th or 6th grade, when I was 10 or 11. This is my original that I bought. Again, it's in stereo, has the gold record seal. However, when I purchased this, it came in a plain white sleeve, and it's on the Apple label. Again, this was early 70s. I want to say 71 or so, 72 that I bought this, I'm guessing. So that's my original copy that I bought as a young boy. I have another one to show you here. I got I don't have all of these Japanese releases, but I do have, because this album was so close to my heart, and I'm sure in future videos I'll talk about, but I lived overseas for 2 years. I lived in England in the late 70s into the early 80s for 2 years. And while I was over there, I purchased a lot of different unique items and artifacts that I'm sure I'll show over time, unique things. I don't have the whole set of these Japanese releases, but I do have this one, which is number 16 in the series, and the flag series they call it, I guess. And I've only played it a couple of times, but it sounds great. These Japanese pressings, I'm sure as many people have spoken about in their videos, sound fantastic. They're unbelievable. And I hope someday to collect more of them or get more of them. As you can see, there's a whole group in the series, and I have a few of them, which I'm sure I'll show others over time, but this is my Meet the Beatles one. Sound is fantastic on the Japanese pressings. And again, it's on the Apple label. Okay. That's another format version I have of Meet the Beatles. Still have my old cassette, folks, from back in the day. This is purchased in the 70s. Again, the blue tint on the Freeman photo, I don't know if it shows up, very blue. As you can see, old beat up cassette. Don't think I'd even try to play this anymore. The song list on the card. Again, this is a good 40 years old at least when I get that. Here's an old 8-track format, Meet the Beatles. I don't see too many of these. This is beat up, as I don't know if it shows up, but the label's pretty beat up from being in and out of the player over the years. This goes back also, way back. Late 60s, early 70s, maybe some of you know for sure. There you go. Meet the Beatles on 8-track. Okay, here's another one here. This was the first time it ever came out on CD. This was in 2004. It was on a box set called the Capitol Albums Volume 1. It was the Dave Dexter mixes, the original Capitol mixes from when the albums were originally released in the 60s. And it has a little Capitol rainbow swirl label. And again, you could only get, the first time it ever came out on CD, you could only get it on that box set, Capitol Albums Volume 1. Great sound on this because it sounds just like the original vinyl as Capitol released it. Again, this was part of a box set, but if you wanted to get it individually, you had to wait 10 years to get it on this format, which was in 2014. It was also part of a box set called the US Albums. But they also sold them individually, and I'm sure you can still get it individually on CD like this if you search around a little bit or order online. See the difference in size of the two box set versions. The one that 04 and the one in 2014. And I don't really care for this one too much. I don't listen to it that much because the sound is basically, they use the mono and stereo mixes from the 2009 remasters series. So the sound isn't what I remember as a young boy back in the early 60s or as a preteen back in the early 70s. This is what I remember. This is the Dave Dexter mixes, the Capitol mixes on that original 2004 box set, which you can only get part of the box set. So again, this is the one I tend to turn to when I need the CD of it. Just to show you that there are other ways this album you could get it on a pin. As you can see, an old stick pin. You could get Meet the Beatles logo on a patch. Okay, I mean, this is collecting 53 years, folks, and I'm sure through my videos you'll see a lot of stuff people have given me, things I picked up when I was young, when I was overseas. Meet the Beatles on a sticker, famous Freeman image, the back cover of Meet the Beatles on a little checkbook or a little address and phone book. Meet the Beatles picture from the back cover. And even not too long ago on a guitar pick, okay, right over here, Meet the Beatles. So, an iconic album, and for all you Beatle ninjas out there, you want to get a Meet the Beatles official ninja sash, well, there you go. Famous Freeman logo, Freeman images from Meet the Beatles on it. There you go. Again, items people have given me over the years, items people have shared with me, bought for me as gifts, items I've picked up over the years. So anyway, this video went a little longer than I thought for my initial vinyl community, Beatle community video, but I hope you enjoyed it. Give you a little introduction to me and to my favorite, probably my favorite as far as sentimental reasons, Beatles album. I'm sure I'll speak about many other albums that mean a lot to me over the time, but this one really holds a special place in my heart. It was the one, as I say, my parents bought for me when I was 3. I consider myself a first-generation fan because I've been aware of them since they came to America, had their music, listened to it. And again, thank you, folks, and I appreciate anyone who does watch this. It's a gift, and I, I thank you. Take care of yourselves, and be safe out there, and God bless. Take care.